Hello, I'm Earl Taylor, Chief Marketing Officer at the Marketing Science Institute. As many of you know, nonprofit MSI serves as the bridge between marketing theory and business practice, and our goal is to move the needle on significant marketing problems. We do this by funding research by leading academics worldwide on topics voted by our 70 or so corporate sponsors, and disseminating that research through members-only events and a variety of publications. I'm very pleased to welcome you to another MSI For Members by Members webinar. This is a series of webinars on subjects related to MSI's current research priority topics. Now first, I'd like to point out the chat with presenter function on the left-hand corner of your screen. Please use this feature to send through any questions you have for Michelle or PK during the presentation. We'll gather the questions and have a brief Q&A session following the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speakers. Michelle Wedel is the PepsiCo Chaired Professor of Consumer Science at the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. He has been ranked one of the most productive market researchers in the world. He has been a consultant for many companies, including Microsoft, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, McKinsey, and Nielsen. He has fundamentally improved the understanding of consumer behavior and marketing decision-making by developing and applying advanced statistical econometric methods. He's also a pioneer in the development of eye-tracking methodology and is considered a worldwide expert on visual marketing. He's published more than 175 peer-reviewed articles, over 20 book chapters that have been cited thousands of times, and he is an area editor for the major journals, including Marketing Science, Journal of Marketing Research, and Journal of Marketing. He's received numerous awards for his teaching, including for the Churchill Award for his contributions to the American Marketing Academy, and he is a fellow of the American Statistical Association. PK Kannan is the Ralph J. Tizer Professor of Marketing Science at the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. His research focuses on digital marketing, marketing modeling, applying statistical and econometric methods to marketing data, looking at real-life problems, teaming up with both for-profit and non-profit organizations. And his research publications span the areas of management science, marketing science, information systems, and engineering. He's received several grants from the National Science Foundation. His papers have been published in top marketing journals, including Marketing Science, Management Science, and Journal of Marketing. And he's won numerous awards, including the Informed Society of Marketing Science Practice Prize Award and the AMA MSI Paul Root Award. He's Associate Editor of Journal of Marketing and Journal of Marketing Research, and he has consulted with companies such as Adobe, Frito-Lay, Pepsi, and IBM. So Michelle and PK are going to be talking to us today about marketing analytics for data-rich environments. And as some of you know, if you've seen our previous webinars, this is one in a series featuring articles in the current issue of Journal of Marketing, which is a MSI special issue based on a conference that we held a few years ago, giving us an overview of what we know about key marketing topics, including the one today. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Michelle and PK.
Well, thank you very much, Earl, and thank you all for joining the webinar. It's really our pleasure to be able to talk about our work that was published in the Journal of Marketing, Marketing Analytics for Data-Rich Environments. And what PK and I are going to do is give you a high-level overview of the contents of the papers. If there's any more details that you would like to inquire about, we have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. As we all know, we live in the era of big data, and big data has been called the oil of the digital economy. Companies routinely capture digital information through both online and mobile interfaces, and that produces vast streams of data on how consumers feel, behave, and interact around products and services, and also about how they respond to marketing efforts. And it's undeniable that data is assuming an ever more central role in organizations. It's being used to build and maintain customer relationships, CRM, to personalize products and services and the marketing mix, and to increasingly automate marketing processes in real time. Initially, big data may have been overhyped, and companies may have invested too much in data capture at the expense of data analytics, and as a result, some of the companies didn't do very well. But now it has been shown that data spawns data-driven decision cultures in companies. It provides them with competitive advantages because it allows them to assess the effects of their marketing effort, make better marketing decisions and serve their customers better, and it has also been shown to significantly impact their financial performance. In addition, it has caused entirely new forms of marketing to emerge. Mobile marketing, recommendation systems, geofencing search marketing, retargeting are just a few of the examples that we'll discuss later on. However, currently there is an urgent demand for better analytics capabilities. Many companies indicate that the barrier towards being more effective in this space is hiring people that have the capabilities to analyze large data sets. And in addition, it's not always clear which types of analytics work for which problems and which data. I'll hand it over to PK.
So we have structured our thoughts based on this framework that you see up on the slide. So at the center, we have the use of analytics for supporting marketing decisions. And of course, this depends on and sometimes even predicated by the type of data that you have, and the type of data could be, we look at structured, unstructured, whether it's internal to the organization or is it external to the organization. And also, as we will see later on, we look at new forms of data. And also, the advances in the analytical methods and analytics will also be a key input for marketing decision making and supporting marketing decisions. And in terms of the focus area that this paper covers, you'll be looking at marketing mix, essentially looking at methods, the models and algorithms that support allocation of resources to improve the effectiveness of marketing mix and get better ROI. And we'll also look at personalization techniques. That is how we're going to personalize marketing mix based on the significant advances that we have made to capture customer heterogeneity. And then the final thing that we'll focus on is kind of an overlooked area, but it's getting to be very important and emerging area of analytics, especially given the firms and regulators are taking a very close look at this. And so how are we going to be developing marketing analytics to take care of this issue in the privacy and security area? And then, these two, actually these form the pillars that we will, look at. There are two things that we're going to be looking at specifically, and that is, organizational structures and the culture that foster data-driven decision making, and that will be a big important factor to consider when you are implementing big data and analytics. And the other pillar that we'll look at would be the analytics education and training. Now I'm going to turn over to Michelle.
It might be of some interest to take a brief look at the history of data in marketing. Charles Coolidge Parlin was widely credited for doing the first marketing research around 1900, but if you look at the first couple of decades of marketing research, it consisted mostly of surveys and survey research. In the 1920s and 1930s, some of the major marketing research companies were founded: AC Nielsen, Burke, and GfK in Europe, and they started to work with diary panels. In the 1960s, companies started to realize that they could use transaction data not only for accounting purposes but also for marketing purposes. And the introduction of the Universal Product Code and IBM's computerized point-of-sale scanning devices in food retailing marked the onset of the first automated data capture in the early 1970s. When it was realized that customers could be traced to loyalty cards, that led to the emergence of scanner panel data. Then around in the 1980s, it was realized that the personal computer could have a major impact on both marketing and marketing research. And in 1995, we see the introduction of the World Wide Web with the emergence of clickstream data that was extracted from consumer logs, and obviously that opened up enormous sources of new data in the form of online user-generated content. Google was founded in 1998. It championed keyword search and the capture of search data, and briefly after that we see the introduction of Facebook in 2004, YouTube in 2005, and Twitter in 2006, which opened up vast amounts of data in the form of user-uploaded text, video, and social interactions. With the introduction of the iPhone, then we see location-based marketing emerging. So from around the 1970s, we see that digital data has been captured, but around about 2000, that data can really be called rich in the sense that it consists of a wide variety of forms of data. Now, if we look at the types of models and techniques that have been applied to these data, then up to around 1970, most of the techniques that were used were standard statistical methods such as analysis of variance and regression. The initiative of the Ford Foundation and the Harvard Institute of Basic Mathematics is widely credited for having provided a major impetus for the application of marketing analytics, and that was because at that point in time, marketing started to be recognized as a field of decision making. And then you see a very rapid proliferation of techniques that are being applied to data, techniques from operation research, multidimensional scaling methods which were imported from psychology, market share models which were calibrated on point of sale scanning data, the conjoint analysis multinomial logit model for scanner panel data, latent class methods for the identification of segments or groups of customers, hierarchical based methods that really enabled us to target individuals specifically based on their responsiveness to marketing efforts, and more recently we see the introduction of structural models. Those are models that allow us to investigate whether consumers make forward-looking decisions and use both demand and supply side information in these models. The question, of course, is what is the next era of development? Essentially, there have been three major phases in the development of marketing techniques. First, the description of market situations. Second, the diagnostic information that was extracted from market with analytical methods. And the third stage enabled us to make optimal allocations of marketing efforts. We believe that we'll see very similar developments in the era of rich data. Rich data currently seems to be in the stage where mostly descriptive analytics are being applied, but we see both the diagnostics and optimal decision-making analytics very useful in the near future. One of the major discussion points in big data analysis has been whether it is useful to have more data or to have better models. And that discussion emerged from research at Microsoft where people showed that if you have more data, you don't necessarily have more complex models. So this slide shows, going from right to left, that the data value increases as data volume increases. So the answer to the question, more data or better models, is rooted in the bias-variance trade-off. As we get more data, the variance of our estimates is going to increase and we become more accurate in being able to make marketing decisions. However, at the same time, data variety and velocity also increase. We get data from many different sources. And as I mentioned before, the types of methods that are being applied as data volume and variety increases are mostly descriptive, as you see on the left-hand side of this slide. Diagnostic methods, predictive methods, and prescriptive methods are very important and are very powerful, but have not yet been applied as much as data volume and variety increases. However, as the complexity of data analytics increases, the decision value also increases, and there's lots of academic research that has shown that. As data variety increases, the complexity of consumer behavior that we can capture increases, and therefore we will need more complex models to capture those more complex behaviors. That increases the decision value of our analytical methods. The problem with doing that is that those more complex models come at a higher computational cost. This has long been a barrier towards the application of those more complex models, but the answer to this question is that if data gets richer and larger, that enables better decision making, but it also necessitates the application of more complex analytical methods. So a big issue in the application of analytics is scalability, and there are several developments recently that make step towards making the application of more complex models feasible. First of all, there are developments in computation. Those are parallel computing, grid and cloud computing, graphic cards, and so on and so forth. The second is applying simpler descriptive modeling approaches, and those are the type of approaches that I mentioned before. So rather than trying to apply complex models to large data sets, we could apply simpler probability models, computer science, machine learning, and all kinds of models that enable closed form solutions. The third possible solution is to try to speed up improvement in the algorithms that we use to estimate those models, and there's a number of examples that are listed there, which mostly come from speeding up so-called Markov chain Monte Carlo methods, which are Bayesian estimation methods, which are state-of-the-art of these more complex models. And there are various developments in the improvements of those algorithms. A fourth solution is the application of data reduction techniques. For example, aggregating the data in one of the dimensions like respondents, variables, or time, or sampling some of those data dimensions. The techniques that are being used there are techniques like data fusion, variable selection, bagging, and boosting. These methods are not applied equally across the board. It turns out that practitioners, as you see on the top of this slide, mostly have focused on the developments in computation and the application of simpler descriptive modeling approaches. We call that small stats on big data. Academics, on the other hand, have worked with, in general, smaller data sets and focused on improvements in speed and the application of aggregation and sampling approaches, big stats on small data. And what we see as a very important avenue for future development is trying to bridge that current gap between the work in academia and the work in practice.
So in the next slide, you see the diagnostic breadth. We talked about the different types of data. And here, you can see here on the right-hand side, you have internal to the firm data, which is fairly structured. And then as you go away from the internal to the external environment, again, the kind of data also tends to be more unstructured. And the kinds of things, the new types of data, where people have been using, there's been a lot of academic research using online reviews, not only with internal reviews that are generated on their own platform, but also reviews generated on external sites. And then you have things like keyword search keyword analytics. Search marketing depends on this, and they look at the interaction between consumers, advertisers, and search engines. And some of the emerging areas is on the big data dimension. It's basically consumers using different types of keywords, and you have interactions and relationship between the different keywords that they used in their purchase funnel, and how would you then use that in order to segment customers and learn more about their conversion behavior. And so these are possible areas where big data can be applied And new techniques such as topic modeling can also be applied in order to find patterns in these keyword searches that consumers do. And then you have mobile data and analytics. Of course, certainly these things enable better recommendations, targeting, geo-targeting, and geofencing. You can do a lot of in-store experiments using these techniques. And so that again forms a different type of data that can easily be amenable to many of the new methodology that we are developing. And in terms of social data, we have social tags, which kind of gives us an idea about the brand equity and firm value, likes, posts, and sentiments. And more you have data on Facebook that can be harvested not only to understand how consumers are viewing your own brand, but also competitive brands. And another area which is gaining more importance is competitive intelligence. That is using the data that's available at third-party sites external to the data in order to understand how your competitors are behaving vis-a-vis your offerings. And so this is again a future area which is going to gain a lot of traction. Trend analysis, for example, using Google Trends data, using a dynamic factor analytical models to spot trends, trying to understand what's there in the environment that can further inform some of the actions that company is going to take. Now, hitherto that's not been explored in great depth is the value in supplementing the internal data with external data. So if you can use the internal data along with some data on competitive intelligence trends and use it in your CRM analytics as well as retail analytics, we think that that's going to pay off in a big way. And the other dimension that needs to be focused on is unstructured data. This is large-scale unstructured data. People have already started using consideration sets, people searching and trying to look at different brands and using that to create competitive market structures. And you can go on Facebook and look at the kind of sentiments people have expressed and also look at the pictures that they have posted and trying to understand if you can really use those unstructured data to understand people's sentiments better, their liking, and the competitive structure that can emerge from that. And then there have also been examples of how people have used large-scale ad copies and use deep learning techniques, machine learning and deep learning techniques in order to boil down the insights that you can derive from these ad copies and then use it further in structured models that you develop internal to the organization. Now we're going to be looking at marketing mix modeling. And there are three things that we will look at because we now have granular customer level data which spans observational, experimental, social, in-store, web, mobile. And some of the things that we're going to be looking at here would be incorporating new data sources. That is, you have increased customer level data within firm. This could be as a result of direct surveys. So you have measures on their attitudes and satisfaction, and maybe observational studies within stores or mobile or online platforms. And so an example of this would be to use customer mindset metric, and research has shown that using those kinds of metrics actually improves prediction of sales and also improves the recommendation for marketing mix allocation. And so social data, for example, using online word of mouth and clickstream data could be incorporated in models of sales and marketing actions. And this is an area because you are looking at intermediate metrics, and these intermediate metrics can be harnessed from other sources, and you can include it in the model where you generally had marketing actions and sales on the y-axis. Now, the other important area for research is attribution and customer path to purchase. Here we are looking at cross-media effects and cross-device effects. The important thing to understand here is that attribution is only the intermediate step, and it has to be an input for further allocation of marketing mix. But people have been looking at, there's a whole lot of research that's going on in this domain from an academic viewpoint. Again, companies have the data and they have to better utilize this data in order to create models which will essentially give some metrics about how the individual instruments themselves are, what is the effectiveness of these individual instruments, how do they work in combination, what are the spillovers, and what are the carryovers, and these things have to be captured better using new research. And better identification of causal effects and correction for endogeneity, and this is what Michelle talked about. There are big stats on small data. We have had structural models developed. We have instrumental variable approach that have been developed to correct for endogeneity and get better sense for causal effects. But they've all been done in the context of small data. But how do you move this to the big data area? And we have a few points that we have indicated there in terms of future research questions. And one of them I want to just focus on is dynamic allocation of resources to individual touch points within that path. That is, if you are able to personalize these kinds of marketing touches at the individual touch point level, then it is going to be much more effective than what you're doing right now.
PK mentioned personalization, so that's the next thing we'd like to briefly discuss. So personalization is likely responsible for much of the increase in the effectiveness of marketing in the last few decades. What it involves adapting the product or service mix to individuals, and we distinguish three different types of personalization. Pull personalization is personalization at the demands of customers, such as is done, for example, by news sites or news aggregators. Think about Flipboard, where you have to indicate the types of news that you would like to receive. A second type of personalization is passive personalization. That is personalization that consumers need to act on. Prime example is recommendation systems, for example, by Amazon or Netflix. Push personalization goes even one step further, and that is personalizing products or services to customers without their specific request. Adaptive personalization is an example, as it's done by Pandora. Music is being personalized to individual tastes without the user even doing more than interacting with the system. So important developments that we see in the future in the area of personalization, first is trying to determine the optimal level of granularity of personalization for each touch point. What does it mean? Personalization can essentially be done at three levels: at the mass level, at the segment level, or at the individual level. The fact that we now have massive amounts of data of large variety available doesn't necessarily mean that we always need to personalize at the individual level. That may or may not be profitable. A company may want to brand at the mass level, may want to advertise at the segment level, and may want to deliver promotions at the individual level. And Ford Motor Company is an example of a company doing that, but much more research is needed to see what the optimal level of granularity of personalization is for each touch point in terms of the profitability that it provides. The second important area is personalization in fully automated closed-loop cycles, adaptive personalization. Think about real-time bidding systems for online advertising. But similar systems, Pandora provides a first step, but similar automated systems could be developed in many other areas that require very limited person intervention. The third area that we see as an important area for future development is the personalization of content. That is content of, for example, online advertising and own social media. Right now, the delivery of advertising, especially online, is personalized, but the content of the ads themselves is not personalized, and the effectiveness, obviously, of advertising is to a large extent determined by its content, and being able to personalize the content of advertising would greatly enhance its effectiveness. A final area for future development is the use of data from natural user interfaces for automated attention analysis. Right now, the way people interact with their digital devices is not only through keyboard entry, but by speech, by touch, and even through eye movements. And as this type of interaction with mobile devices will increase and become more and more common, this will produce a wealth of data that will be extremely useful for marketers to deploy, and we have only scratched the surface of trying to do so.
So in the near future, we think that there is extraordinary potential in industry and academics teaming up and trying to reconcile this big stats on small data with practitioner small stats on big data. And there are different ways in which one can embark on these kinds of projects. Of course, now with increasingly machine learning and deep learning methods being available, and you have large data set that's generated in real time, you can use these techniques in order to reduce the dimensionality of the data and then associate it with other kinds of data internally available within an organization, which are the small data. But at the same time, it gives you a way of combining fast-moving, high-velocity data with internal data, which is more structured, and then try to get some newer insights. And since from a practitioner viewpoint, they are also interested in real time, I think there is a need for academics to really work on real-time solutions which can be guided by some automated modeling that we can come up with. Now, I also talked about previously privacy and security concerns. Now, this is going to be an increasingly important area of research. And what's going to happen here is that increasingly, either because of government control on what information can be collected, what data can be collected, and also because of self-policing by organizations, you're going to have increased pressure not to collect too much data. So we call this issue as a dual issue of minimizing data. That is, you collect only certain data that is needed for you. You don't collect all the data. And even if you collect all the data, you throw away some of the data after maybe 1 or 2 months. So you don't collect it and put it in your data warehouse. And the reason for this is it will also minimize a security breach, minimize the risks of security breach and data being lost, because increasingly we are finding that customer data, if it's lost, it's going to decrease the trust in the firm. So there will be an increased pressure on companies to minimize data, and even if they collect data, there has to be some anonymization that needs to be done. So the next area of research that marketing analytics has to look at will be to see how analytics can be developed in order to deal with data that is minimized or anonymized, at the same time without losing any of the functionality that you will get from analytical methods. So this is going to be a next area of research, and there's already a lot of research that's being done in this area, and the paper talks about it. And also, the next thing that we need to focus on would be the proactive development of methods for protection of customer privacy. And so this could even mean some kind of opt-in kind of mechanism where consumers come in with a very clear idea as to what they opt in. And the fact that they opt in or not, again, is an information that is available to the firm, and that can then be utilized in trying to do some data fusion methods in order to develop a better sense for the whole market. Now, for marketing analytics to have its full impact, it's absolutely important that firms need to have a culture that recognizes the importance of data and analytics. And it has to be centered on data-driven decision making. And again, firms are going in this direction, of course, but what is more important is that there has to be a governance structure that prevents silos. We have worked with companies where we have interacted with marketing teams which have been organized in a particular way, and so it might be that email may be under the control of one silo, and you have display being under the control of different silo. And for example, when we try to come up with optimal models for marketing mix, there is always going to be some amount of parochialism that comes because of the way the firms are organized. And certainly then it is important for the decision to be made at a higher level. And right now, because of all these silos, most of the decisions that are made within organizations, even the better companies, is becoming suboptimal, because you are dealing within the silo and optimizing it without looking across the silos. And so there has to be new research that needs to be done to see how exactly can organizations be structured in order to help data-driven decision making. And of course, for marketing academics, this involves a combination of different domains that we need to know. We may be trained in one area, but it's important for us to really look at all the developments that have gone on. And in terms of educating our next batch of students, it's also important to have different levels of education and different focus for the students. Some of them may be higher level customer facing, and some of them may be down in the trenches working with the data. And so there is a lot of things that needs to be taken into account as we look to the future. Now, we will actually close our presentation for now. We have actually provided all the citations of the papers in our paper, so we haven't really spoken to any particular citation during our presentation, but you can go and look at our paper. Now I'll turn it over to Earl.
Thanks very much, PK and Michelle. That was great. A lot of content, very well organized and presented. Thank you. We do have some questions, and I suspect others will be coming in. Early on in the presentation, Ricardo asked the question, which may have been clarified subsequently, but he was asking you to state again the distinction you make between predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics. What is the distinction you're trying to capture there?
Can I go back to the slide where we discussed this, or is it?
Yes, you can do that.
Let me.
I think it's near the beginning.
So here we talked about different types of analytics. So descriptive analytics, what that does is describe the data through simple methods. Diagnostic analytics tries to establish relationships between specific variables. For example, the relation between marketing actions and consumer behavior. With predictive analytics, you can forecast future actions. For example, predictive analytics will allow you to predict what would happen if we change our prices or if we spend more on advertising. Prescriptive analytics allows us to optimally allocate marketing resources to different marketing actions. For example, how much should we spend on promotions and how much should we spend on advertising, and there's optimal solutions to that. So the level of sophistication of both the analysis and of the implications for marketing decisions increases from descriptive to diagnostic to predictive to prescriptive.
Okay, I think that's very helpful. And there's actually a related question. Later in the presentation, Paul asked the question that with time-stamped real data, the kind of internal data that you described that most companies have now on their customer transactions and so forth, shouldn't it be fairly straightforward to develop causal models about, the cause preceding the effect, that sort of thing? I mean, if you're looking at data that comes in that time series, doesn't that lend itself to sort of the causal modeling, which I guess would get you to the predictive level and then eventually to prescriptive? So your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and very good question. Obviously, Paul, that is obviously true, right? So if you have temporal precedence, then the cause most of the time needs to come before the effect. I mean, that is unfortunately only one of the conditions. I can give you an example. Suppose that I raise my price or I lower my price in a certain period, then the response of consumers will occur likely in that period or the next period. However, if I fail to acknowledge the fact that my competitors might react to my price change, and I do not include that in a model, then the effect that I will find on sales, for example, is not really a pure causal effect of my own price change, but it's a combined effect of my price change and competitor price changes. And similar examples exist when consumers are forward-looking. When consumers anticipate future marketing actions, for example, they wait for promotions, then sort of that temporal precedence is no longer valid. So yes, I think it's a very good point. But the fact that we have data of high velocity doesn't really mean that we can now ignore issues of causality completely. We still have to be careful about that.
Yeah, thanks very much. That was well put. Laurent has a question that I think goes back to really the whole premise of your article and this presentation, and that is fostering this cooperation between academics and practitioners. And he says, what is it that prevents that from happening more often? I know from the former practice prize competitions, there's a common complaint that we build these better analytic models, these better mousetraps, if you will, and for some reason businesses are just not able to adopt and act on them as much as you might think they would. So your thoughts about some of the barriers from the type of work that you're able to do with big data today and the actual implementation and use of this by business. What are some of the barriers preventing that from happening?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And, I might want to, kind of highlight and say that in the past, this has been a greater problem. That is, the companies have not really been very, and academics also not been very forthcoming in trying to cooperate. But I think with the emergence of big data, the culture is actually changing. And based on our experience in working with companies, what we find is that, managers are inundated with a lot of data that they can collect, and the competitors who do a better job of harnessing the data are doing better. And so they are much more open now to doing a lot of collaborations. And to point that all the practice prize competition has shown that people who have taken the initiative to really collaborate, they have actually, really been supported by all the research that has been done in the academic environment, and they have benefited from that. Now, what happens sometimes when you interact with organizations is the timing, because organizations want answers right now, and academics have their own time frame, and sometimes there could be a misalignment. I think there has to be a better education to show that there are issues where you can provide quick answers, and there are issues where some deep thought is necessary and some analysis has to be done, which will actually take some time. And more and more, what MSI is doing now, as more practitioners and academics come together and discuss these problems, you can easily find out issues where academics can provide quick answers, and there are lots of issues where it has to be deliberated, and you need to have more research done in order to provide good supporting recommendations. And I think I'm very optimistic about it. Both Michelle and I have worked with these companies, and we found that they are more and more open in order to collaborate. And I think the environment has changed very quickly, and then companies realize that academics are part and parcel of developing these kinds of systems.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I mean, there are definitely success stories. So some of the methods we talked about in the paper have been developed in academia and have diffused into practice. Market share models, coin-joint analysis, multinomial logic, latent class are all examples. And there's also very successful examples of academics that have started up companies in measuring satisfaction, doing international marketing, sales force allocation, and so on, which have become very, very successful. And so there are definitely success stories, but we hope in the future that there will be more collaboration, and definitely MSI will be an important mediator for that.
Yeah, thanks to you both. That's a great answer. And that actually brings me to our next question, or a set of questions really, and that is the ability of companies, now that we can analyze data, in some cases automate the analysis, at least in part, in more or less real time, then it raises the question of whether or not companies can actually execute. Now, the pure play internet companies that can change websites and so forth on the fly, or as you suggested at one point, maybe even adapt the content to the particular point that a person is in the path to purchase or path to decision. We're seeing some interesting developments in that regard. But a lot of companies that don't operate in that kind of pure internet environment might find it harder to execute in real time. So are there some limitations, maybe analytics getting ahead of companies' abilities to actually execute, not having anything to do with resistance on their part, but simply the practicality of making changes on the fly?
I mean, scalability. Of course, scalability is one of the major issues, and we did talk about that a little bit. We don't know everything, of course, that goes on in practice or academia, but there are some companies that have made very significant advances in applying fairly complicated or sometimes even very complicated models that really yield deep insights to very large data sets. One of the companies that, for example, we both have worked with is Information Insights, and it's a company that is based in Boston, does very high-end Bayesian analytics and can do it at a very, very large scale, much larger than what most, if not any, academic presently can do. But definitely the speed at which data comes in and building an infrastructure for the capture and the cleaning of the data is a very important part of being successful in the utilization of rich data sets for making better decisions.
And also, there are attribution solutions that are being made available by a lot of marketing consultants, which are basically applications of big data, and they actually can provide real-time kind of capabilities. I have sat in on some of the presentations done by these companies, and all of them seem to have the capability to process the high volume of data fairly quickly and provide maybe even half-day based reports. If people come onto your online site within a half a day, they'll be able to give you insights as to how the attribution has worked out. And that said, of course, the need for that kind of solutions really depends on how quickly those things are being put to use. And in organizations, it doesn't come to a point where you may have a lot of algorithm-driven decision making that's being done, and we have also looked at those kinds of issues. But even small mistakes that you do in algorithmic decision making can lead to very large-scale errors. And this is something that even academics can actually look at and see that even real-time solutions and algorithmic implementations have to be carefully done, because if you have a small 1% error can really balloon into a 10-15% error at the outcome place. So those are areas where we need to focus on more. Even though there are automated solutions, we really have to be careful that what we get out is the right thing that we want.
PK, that's great. I was actually about to ask a question specifically on that issue, which is to say that in a lot of cases the real-time applications can be automated, and earlier this year we had a conference on applying big data analytics in the media world, and programmatic buying of advertising online, for example, is a classic example. That happens almost like stock exchange trades these days in microseconds. And it raises a broader question. You pointed one of the dangers is if you have a slight mistake or flaw in your algorithm, it can actually generate results that you don't want, or you're paying for things that aren't going to be effective. On the other hand, there's a couple of related questions. One is, you mentioned the push personalization. In theory, we can actually tell people what they want before they know they want it. But we're getting pushed back, you might say, from consumers sometimes, the so-called creepiness factor. They realize they're being followed online, and the decisions are being made about their shopping behavior and so forth, and they're being served up ads that may be a little too close for comfort. And a related topic that also came up at that previous conference is it's possible to over-target. In other words, if you're adapting your targeting of messages so precisely as to reach only those people that are already persuaded to be your customers, you're really missing that next tier of potential customers that you might have been reaching with a more broadcast type of an approach. So I guess the question is, when is too much of a good thing too much? The hyper-targeting that might induce the creepiness factor, that might actually not be the best use of your resources to reach a wider audience, and the automating of some of these decisions where the results might not be what you expected. So a little bit more about kind of the dangers or pitfalls of that.
Yeah, hyper-targeting is definitely a problem. We've done research in this area, and it's actually possible. We look both at news and music, and it's actually possible to build systems that are too effective. So they zoom in very quickly on a narrow set of user tastes, and they're very, very good at doing that. And this is something that you can also see, for example, in the Pandora example that I mentioned. And so if you build those types of algorithms, you need to take into account that the algorithm itself needs to keep learning. And so it's a trade-off between exploration and exploitation. You need to build in ways of targeting that are slightly more random, and that will allow you to pick up new information and keep learning. To your second point, consumer annoyance or boredom with the targeting, I think that's an extremely important point that we shouldn't take too lightly as marketers, because it has the potential to backfire enormously. But we do have the opportunities to take that into account. And so in targeting, we should, for example, a very simple example is that if it's clear that targeting is to consumers, that targeting is done fully automatically, they might feel less spooked by being followed by online advertising than when they believe that there's an actual person looking at whatever it is that they've done and targeting the messages. And so in part it's a matter of better communicating what is done, and in another part it is building into our targeting systems, if they are fully automated, ways to make sure that these types of adverse effects do not occur. But I do think it's an important area that we currently have not yet sufficiently addressed.
And also, as the cost for targeting really comes down, there could also be ways in which you can add noise to your targeting. So let's say you figure out that this is the ad that you want to send to the customer, but then you couch it along with some noise, which means you may have 2 or 3 other ads which may seem like they are not very important to them. And so it's a question of making sure that you don't become too targeted. At the same time, provide some kind of assurance to the consumer that you really don't know much about them. And so those are some of the research that's being done in order to find out whether the perception of consumers can actually be altered by actually adding noise to your targeting.
That's very interesting. We've seen similar examples, I think, in search engine results, that if it generates less than ideal or perfect fit, it gives the consumer more a sense of choosing from the options that were served up, and you actually may have a better uptake on the results. One last question. It kind of takes us back to the opening comments about the need for analytics training and education, not just for the data scientists that are doing that, but for the managers and the marketers who are going to be relying on these things. To the extent that things can be automated the way we've been discussing, with all the caveats about that, what is the role of the marketing manager going forward? I mean, is he or she going to be left to be making decisions? Or are they simply there, to kind of watch automated decisions being made and hope for the best results? So your thoughts about how these tools can actually enable marketing managers, the people that actually have to execute on these insights, are they becoming increasingly less relevant to the process?
The short answer to that would be no. The reason is the following. Of course, we can automate quite a few of the marketing processes, and there are very high-end analytics methods that can be developed and applied by people with training in mathematics and engineering and computer science and so on. What we have actually seen in practice is that there is a big risk. Of course, these are outstanding people. The technical skills of people in those fields are outstanding, but the big risk of deploying them at a large scale in organizations is that they miss much of the marketing context. And so they might be very good at running specific models and speeding up the computation of the models. But if they're not targeting the right marketing problems, or if they're not targeting marketing problems in the right way, then they're going to be much less effective in their job. So I think in the future, the types of people, of course, we'll need analysts, and we need analysts that are have extremely strong analytical skills, but also have a very solid training in the marketing context and aspects of consumer behavior, because that allows them to understand the problem, and the understanding of the problem drives the specific types of methods that are being applied. On the other hand, the marketing managers will need to be at least aware of or informed of the specific technological developments. They might not have to be able to execute all of them, but they will need to be able to understand them to the extent that they are able to tell the people that are working for them what are the types of methods that are required, how are they being applied, and in case that they're fully automated, that there's a stop button at some point when things go wrong, that somebody can operate.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that marketing managers bring to the they actually look at all the solutions provided by many of these automated algorithms and everything else, and then apply the smell test or the sniff test. And if it doesn't pass that, they're very skeptical about what these algorithms and things are saying. So I think what it is people who have been have been studying their consumers for a very long time kind of have an idea as to what would be the expected kind of solutions that could come up with. And if there is some kind of even by mistake or anything else, that there is some variation in what they expect, marketing managers really can act on it. And I think that's where the value is, trying to figure out whether in a particular situation the kind of solutions that are being developed, are they performing the right thing? Do they pass the smell test? And I think from that viewpoint, marketing managers and human intuition is very much still needed in order for companies to survive.
That's great, PK and Michelle, and very well said. Again, I think our audience will be pleased to hear that there is still a role for the marketing manager and that the insights function assisted by these new amazing tools. So again, thanks so much to our speakers. If they didn't get to your questions today, or if you have additional questions you'd like to discuss with them, please send your comments to Michelle at the email address that we're showing on the chat function, and he will be happy to share with PK, and they'll get back to you. I want to call your attention to our next webinar, which will be leveraging omni-channel shopping through mobile, featuring Vinky Shankar. This will be January 11th, 2017. So we will be seeing you early next year. And for those of you on the webinar today who are MSI members, academic or corporate members of MSI, watch for an email in the next day or so that will include a link to the article in the special issue of Journal of Marketing that PK and Michelle have been referring to, the article they wrote for that special issue. You'll be able to download that free at that link. So again, many thanks to the members of the MSI audience for participating in our member-to-member webinar series. We'll look forward to seeing you again next year, and happy holidays.